Carlo Ancelotti has officially confirmed what many had feared for weeks, and the consequences for Brazil at this World Cup are seismic. Just over a month ago, Neymar was handed what many called a miraculous second chance, a shot call-up to the Brazilian squad for the World Cup in the US. The entire nation roared. The headlines were electric. The story of redemption felt almost too good to be true, and it most certainly was. Because right now, with Brazil already deep into their group stage preparations, Neymar has not trained in over 25 days. And Ancelotti, the man who reluctantly handed him that squad number in the first place, has now come out and said what the whole football world had already suspected. Neymar will not play a single minute at this World Cup. Stick around because this is more complicated than it looks. There are external pressures, leaked behind the scenes politics, players left at home because of Neymar, even though they deserve to be here, and much more. We will break down the entire picture and you will see just how unfair the whole situation has been from the beginning. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to when Ancelotti first sat down to build his Brazil squad and understand that Neymar was not in that picture. Not even close. This is a man who has not played a competitive minute for over a year. A player who suffered one of the most devastating ACL and meniscus injuries in recent memory, returning to Al Hilal only to break down again almost immediately. The recovery road had been brutal, slow, and deeply uncertain. And when Ancelotti began sketching out his squad philosophy, a fluid, high-pressing system built around pace, youth, and collective energy, Neymar's name was conspicuously absent from the list he was working toward. The manager had seen the medical reports. He knew, better than most, just how fragile the situation truly was. Then came the pressure, because in Brazil, Neymar is not simply a footballer. He is a cultural institution. He is the embodiment of an entire generation's footballing identity. To leave him out of a home World Cup, one the nation has waited decades to host again, felt to many Brazilians like a political impossibility, regardless of what the football demanded. The noise from the media, from former legends, from fans who still worship at the altar of the number 10, became deafening. Pundits went on television and called it a national embarrassment. Former players argued the case with genuine fury. And Ancelotti, a manager renowned for his composure, found himself in an impossible position, one where the rational footballing decision and the politically survivable decision were pointing in completely opposite directions. He blinked. When Neymar's name appeared on the official Brazil squad list, the reaction was extraordinary. Social media erupted. Brazilian television ran wall-to-wall coverage. The narrative of the fallen king reclaiming his throne, of the prodigal son returning to lead his nation on the grandest stage of all, was irresistible. It was a content machine, a commercial dream, and for a brief moment, it felt like the football might just work out too. But behind the scenes, those close to the setup knew the truth. Ancelotti had included Neymar under enormous external pressure. Pressure from the Brazilian Football Confederation, pressure from commercial interests, and pressure from a public that simply refused to accept a World Cup without their icon. This was not a selection driven by tactical conviction. This was a selection driven by political necessity. Let that sink in. The most high-profile name on the squad sheet was there not because the manager truly wanted him, but because the manager had no viable path to leaving him out, without triggering a national crisis before a single ball had been kicked. And here is where things get complicated, because even with the announcement made and the place confirmed, there were conditions quietly circling in the background. Neymar's fitness was described cautiously, with the kind of hedged language that should have set off alarm bells from the very beginning. He was progressing. He was working hard. He was expected to be ready. The keyword always was expected. Then came the news that changed everything, and it came swiftly. Within days of the squad announcement, reports began emerging that Neymar was dealing with a physical issue that had not been made fully public during the selection process. This was not a minor training knock. This was not routine precautionary management. The underlying injury that had derailed him through so much of the last 18 months had not been resolved in the way the optimistic headlines had suggested. The recovery had stalled, the timeline had slipped, and suddenly the Brazil camp was managing a situation they had, in part, created for themselves. Ancelotti faced an immediate choice: replace him in the squad, bring in a fit player who could contribute from day one and deal with the fallout. Or keep Neymar in the group, manage expectations carefully, and hope the situation improved as the tournament drew near. He chose the second option, and that choice was not made out of tactical stubbornness. It was made because the backlash of dropping Neymar, even after a legitimate fitness concern had emerged, would have been catastrophic. The Brazilian press would have turned instantly. The public would have turned. Ancelotti was already navigating the delicate position of being a foreign manager, trying to win the trust of a passionate nation. Cutting the hero before a competitive ball had been kicked would have been a battle he simply could not win, regardless of how justified the decision might have been on purely footballing grounds. So the messaging shifted. Neymar would miss the opening group game, but he would be fine for the ones that followed. Then it became the second game. Then the murmurs grew darker, perhaps the whole group stage, and all the while, the training ground remained a place Neymar could not access at full capacity. 25 days, that is how long he has now gone without meaningful training involvement. 25 days at a World Cup, where every session, every tactical rehearsal, every minute of preparation is absolutely critical. Ancelotti has now confirmed it. The language was measured, as it always is with him. Composed, respectful, deliberately careful. But the meaning was unmistakable. Neymar will not be fit enough to feature in a Brazil shirt at this tournament. The timeline of his recovery does not align with Brazil's journey through the group stages and into the knockout rounds. By the time he might conceivably be ready to start accumulating minutes, proper minutes, not desperate late cameos, Brazil will either be through or they will already be out. There is no scenario where Neymar contributes meaningfully at this World Cup. That chapter is over. And here is the deeper truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Ancelotti may not be entirely devastated by this. That sounds harsh. It sounds cold. But consider his position honestly. He now gets to implement the tactical setup he always wanted, the system built without Neymar at the center of it, without having to publicly defend that choice. The decision has been taken out of his hands entirely, made for him by injury and circumstance. He can express sympathy, speak warmly of Neymar, talk about what might have been, and then go and coach the team he actually always believed in, free from criticism and free from the noise. The man who was brought in under suffocating pressure to include Neymar is now, quietly, completely free of that pressure. That is a remarkably convenient position to find yourself in as a tournament manager. But while attention stays fixed on Neymar, on the scale of his absence, on what it means emotionally, there is a figure sitting at home right now who deserves far more of this conversation. João Pedro. Here is a player who just completed one of the most productive and consistent seasons of his entire career. Over 60 competitive appearances, more than 20 goals, contributions at both ends, pressing leads, winning headers, creating chances when his team needed them most. The full package, week in and week out across an exhausting domestic season. The kind of campaign that managers point to when they talk about what they want from a centre forward. João Pedro showed up every single time it mattered. He delivered the numbers. He earned his place through sheer hard work, rather than inheriting it through reputation. He is not at this World Cup. He is at home, watching on television, because a squad place his performances had clearly earned was handed to Neymar on the basis of name, legacy, and the weight of public expectation. That is not football logic. That is not selection based on merit. And now that Neymar will play no part in the tournament at all, the injustice of João Pedro's absence feels sharper than ever. He worked for a place at this World Cup across 60 plus games of genuine, measurable contribution this season alone. Instead, he watches from his living room, while the player who took his spot cannot even put his boots on and step onto a training pitch. This is the cost of selection by sentiment rather than substance. And it is João Pedro, quiet, professional, relentlessly productive João Pedro, who pays that price. Step back and look at the full scope of what has unfolded here. A manager selected a player he did not fully believe in due to external pressure. That player arrived carrying an injury that was not fully disclosed at the point of selection. The manager then declined to remove him from the squad as the fitness picture worsened to avoid a media storm. The situation deteriorated over 25 days, and now the confirmation has come. Neymar will play no part. The squad place was effectively wasted, and a player who deserved to be here is watching from his sofa. Every element of this story points to the same fundamental problem: the gap between what a manager wants to do and what a manager is actually allowed to do when the politics are this intense. Ancelotti is not the first coach to bend under this kind of pressure. He will not be the last. But in this case, the consequences are real. A wasted squad spot and a deserving player watching from home. And football suffers every single time that gap exists. Ancelotti is experienced enough to navigate the road ahead. He will reshape the narrative, frame Neymar's absence as unfortunate rather than symptomatic, and redirect his squad's focus toward the challenge ahead. But the questions will linger. What if the squad had been selected purely on merit? What if João Pedro had been trusted with the place his performances had clearly earned? We will never know, but the suspicion is absolutely there. So here is where we land. Neymar's World Cup is over before it ever truly began. A story that felt like one of sport's great redemption arcs has ended not with a decisive goal or a moment of magic, but with a medical update and a press conference where his manager chose every word with extreme care. That is not the ending anyone wanted, but it is the one this situation, built on compromise and political calculation from the very start, was always quietly moving toward. Could Neymar have made a real difference here if fit? Absolutely. At his best, there are few players on the planet who carry that kind of instinctive, unpredictable threat in the final third. But we will never know. And that remains the unanswered question that will follow his international career into history. What we do know is this: Brazil must now move forward without the player who defined their footballing identity for 2 decades. The squad Ancelotti always wanted to build, the one designed around collective energy rather than the individual genius of a single aging star, is now, quietly and without fanfare, the squad he finally gets to use. For the first time in this tournament, the question is not how do you fit Neymar into the system. It is whether the system Ancelotti truly believes in is good enough to win Brazil, a World Cup the nation has been waiting for since 2002. That is the story no one saw coming, and yet looking back, perhaps everyone should have. Whether Brazil can go all the way without their icon, and whether Ancelotti's football can hold up under the weight of that expectation. That is the story that follows this one. Because Neymar's World Cup dream is over, but Brazil's is still being written. And Ancelotti, for better or worse, finally gets to write it entirely his way.